But first, to one of the 9 most powerful people in our country. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer has served in the nation's highest court for 21 years. His new book is called The Court and the World, American Law and New Global Realities. Justice Breyer, very good to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to start by raising my right hand and say, when I picked up this book last night, I thought it was going to be dense, inaccessible for mere mortals. It is eye-opening and terrific. So my apologies in advance. The thesis is, in the era of globalization, the shrinking world, the court has to look beyond our borders. It has to look at the rest of the world, law around the world, experience. Am I right so far?
Yes.
So give us an example, real-world example, from national security, domestic law, environmental law. Give us an example of how that works.
Well, think of Dolly Filartiga. She was from Paraguay. She came to New York in the mid-1970s, and there she discovers the man who tortured her brother to death, also from Paraguay. She also found a very old law passed in the 1790s in order to help victims of pirates. She uses the law, she brings a lawsuit, and she wins. She goes back to Paraguay and she says, I wanted to look that man in the face and I came back with so much more. Well, after her lawsuit, lots of other people brought similar lawsuits. And now we have to begin to interpret the statute, which says an alien can bring a tort suit for a violation of the law of nations. That's a kind of international law. But who, how, what? Who are today's pirates? What do we do if South Africa, as it did, say, we don't want American judges getting involved in our problems? We have Truth and Reconciliation Committees. How do we, in fact, interpret that statute? You must look abroad to help answer that question.
Even your colleagues who find that the concept relatively abhorrent would agree in a case like that you have no choice. Is that a safe assumption?
They would look to what was going to happen abroad.
Okay, so but when you speak to looking, is it to inform, for you to consider, or in some cases it's actually fairly determinative, is it not?
In some cases it is. Suppose there's a treaty about domestic relations, about abducting children. And there are lots of others.
Let me talk about where I think it is critical, and I think you do too. I'm going to read a little bit from your dissent, your powerful dissent in that, I think, the final case of the last term, this lethal injection case out of Oklahoma. I note, however, this is you writing, that many nations, indeed 95 of the 193 members of the UN, have formally abolished the death penalty. An additional 42 have abolished it in practice. In 2013, only 22 countries in the world carried out an execution. Almost 80% of all known executions took place in 3 countries, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. But you aren't arguing there that the reason why the death penalty violates the cruel and unusual punishment of the 8th Amendment is because we're an outlier. That's just one factor, correct?
Correct.
What's the rest of your argument?
I said, first of all, wrong person sometimes. Second, very arbitrary, like being hit by lightning. People who should perhaps don't, and the people who don't do. I mean, third, that there is in fact 18 years on average, 18 years between the time such a sentence is pronounced and the time it's carried out, and very few executions really take place. Put those all together, just a handful of counties have it. The way it's administered, I said, is sufficiently arbitrary, cruel, unusual now, that we should reconsider the matter.
But part of the unusual is what I just read, is it not?
Part of it, but it is ambiguous. Did the founders, when they wrote the relevant clause forbidding cruel and unusual punishments, did they mean unusual in the United States, or did they mean unusual in the world?
Do we have any idea what they meant when they said unusual?
No, I don't think we do.
So, the death penalty, even a court that I think, you may not like this characterization, but I think most observers would say conservative-leaning Supreme Court, even this court has cut back on the death penalty when it comes to mental capacity, juveniles, that sort of thing. So are we on a track to end up where your dissent was, or is that wishful thinking?
It might or might not turn out to be wishful thinking. I said we should reconsider the matter, and we'll see what happens.
Tenure. 21 years?
Yes.
Is that enough?
Perhaps, I don't know. When will I retire? I suppose I will find out from my inner voice and we'll see.
But what do you think about lifetime tenure? The notion, you have served through the terms of, well, 5 presidential terms, theoretically 5 presidents, some of your colleagues even longer. Is there not something wrong with that picture in your mind?
I think, were it up to me, I would say there should be a long tenure. Whether it's a term of years or not, maybe it would be better to have a term of years, but it must be long, because you don't want a person in that job thinking about his next job. The reason I tend not to get deeply involved in it is it would require, in all likelihood, a constitutional amendment, and opening up the Constitution to all kinds of amendments is not something that I think is going to happen or should happen.
Well, speaking of the Constitution, the Second Amendment was the basis, I believe, of a pretty important case. Was it 2008, the Dc Handgun Case? Yeah. As a layperson, even though I was a lawyer when I was a kid, well, much of America is saying we need more gun control. The way I read that decision is that argument could be the basis for eliminating all gun control in this country. Am I off base?
There's a great undecided question. I was against the majority.
I know that.
The majority read the Second Amendment as saying it gives some kind of right. It gives a right to people to keep handguns if they're qualified, etc. And the reason I put in qualified, etc. is they seem, but you make up your own mind, to say that reasonable regulation is permitted. Certainly 47 states that have constitutions with provisions similar to the Second Amendment have allowed reasonable regulation, and I think maybe there's only 1 or 2 exceptions. They've approved the regulations that their legislatures have voted. Therefore, the question remains, precisely what kind of regulation will the Second Amendment permit? And I've used the word reasonable, but we'd find out case by case. It has not yet shut off regulation.
How's your job satisfaction? 21, I mean, in some ways, I say, as a non-Supreme Court Associate Justice, how terrific to be in the middle of history for almost a quarter century of your life. But then I say to myself, how horrible to be confined to not say what you think about things that it's pretty clear all 9 of you care deeply about, except within the confines of the case before. Is that not wildly frustrating for you?
No. The exception swallows the rule.
Meaning what?
Meaning that I have a lot to do. People take their job very seriously on the court. David Souter said, "You're always on duty." And the reason you're always on duty is because there's always in front of you a string of cases raising legal issues where good judges have come to different conclusions on the same question, text of a statute or text of the Constitution. Now that requires thinking, consideration, some understanding of how it will affect ordinary Americans, putting that together and doing it quite a lot of the days during the year is a very satisfactory thing to do, but you cannot relax. You have to be serious about it.
So you don't have blood pressure problems when there's a big issue you'd like to speak out on just as a human being and you can't. You're fine with that?
Yes, I am fine with it.
Now, a topic that great Supreme Court observer Stephen Colbert raised with you a couple of weeks ago is something with which I am obsessed, and I use the term loosely, cameras in the courtroom. I want to read back to you what you said, which surprised me, I must say. Will they understand the whole story, meaning the public? Will they understand what we're doing? Will there be distortion? Isn't seeing what's actually happening the ultimate in anti-distortion as opposed to allowing it to be filtered through the likes of me? It's almost condescending. It's almost like real people can't understand what the 9 of us and the litigants do. Is that almost what you're saying?
No, I think in context, the question was, I was trying to get the point across, that 95% of the way we decide is in writing. And that oral argument is just a small part of it. And you can say, well, will there be distortion? Maybe not. But he held up a book, a copy of this book, and he said, if you were on television, you wouldn't have to come here to promote your book. You could just hold it up. And I said, exactly, exactly. And I heard one person say, and I don't know if it's true or not, but a person who was close to a president said, if the judges were on television, I would have to recommend that a president appoint someone who's good on television. Now, is there some truth to that, or isn't there? I don't know. And is there some truth? People have told me this. Wait till you see Wait till you see the first time a journalist who isn't necessarily so responsible. I don't know if there are any such people. But suppose you are totally distorted. Will that affect the way you decide the next case? And we're conservative in that respect. We worry about it. This institution has served the country well. So all you're seeing is not a bunch of logical arguments. All you're seeing the other way is, I'm nervous about it. I don't know what the changes would be. I don't want to be the one who is responsible for the court doing worse.
Can I have one last crack at this?
Sure.
Virtually every state court in the country has a camera in the courtroom. When Jahar Tsarnaev was prosecuted in my name and yours, I couldn't see that. When Whitey Bulger was prosecuted also in South Boston, I couldn't see that. Is that not troubling too? And I know that's even a more difficult situation.
I know, it is. Do you want to see? Do you want the neighbors to see? The jurors? Do you want
No,
the
not the
neighbors?
jurors.
No,
They don't see the jurors in state courts.
Do you want the neighbors to see the case? Earl Warren, the former Chief Justice of the United States, said, a criminal trial is not an entertainment. Now, I think the reality is I'm torn. And I am torn. It's not, I don't lose that much sleep, but nonetheless, look, if you could see on television the arguments put forward in our court, in oral argument, on a case like, does the Constitution permit the state of Arkansas to limit the terms of congressmen to 2 or to 3? It would be terrific.
I don't have to watch.
It would be terrific learning experience.
What did you say to me about your cup when you came out here?
I said there's coffee in it.
Yeah, can I read you? You ever read this book, Pigeon in a Crosswalk?
No.
It's written by the producer of Anderson Cooper. Used to be my producer. Used to be the great Chet Curtis's producer. Chet Curtis came and interviewed you in your house. There's an essay about that interview. It ends as follows. Here's Chet Curtis. Hell of a guy, meaning you.
That's very nice.
Brilliant. One of the most interesting people I've ever interviewed, pausing as if he had something else to add. But, I said, nervously, and then Chet says, can you believe he gave us instant coffee?
I did.
Is that how you plead? Guilty?
I guess so. I don't normally drink. This isn't instant coffee.
No, believe we don't do that here. Justice Breyer,
Good.
it's great to see you. The
Thank
book
you.
is fabulous, and I hope people read it.
Thank you very much. Nice.